everybody. Very happy to be live with Emma today, who starts off with an introduction to herself and her books.
Hello there. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for inviting me to join everyone this evening. My name's Emma Salisbury. I'm the writer of a Manchester detective series that features Detective Sergeant Kevin Coupland, who is a middle-aged, grumpy detective who a little bit old-fashioned, but he gets things done. I've just written the 8th book in the series, Made to be Broken. It features a lot of things that I'm sure we'll be discussing in a little while. But the series has been very well received and is very popular around the UK, not just with Mancunians because it's based in Salford, but it does have a northern sort of sarcastic wit to it. And a bluntness that I think people or readers tell me that they appreciate anyway. It's a lot of fun creating the character. I've enjoyed it along the way, and I do try to cover as many kind of topics as possible in the plots. So hopefully I can explain a little bit more about the series through the interview.
Well, start us off by telling us more about your main character.
Okay, so Kevin Coupland is mid-40s. He is a chain smoker. He still likes un-PC food. His wife's trying to get him to eat healthily. He's got high blood pressure. He's borderline. Cholesterol levels are a bit dodgy. So every so often there will be reference to what he's eating or not eating or should be eating. He tries to live a better life. He tries to be a better person. He's got a short fuse, but a big heart. He has had some challenges in his relationship or with his family relationships. But he's got, without too many spoilers, I have to be careful here, but he's very close to his family and will do anything for them. He does have a very difficult relationship with his father and his sisters. And we kind of get to know through those relationships a little bit more about him and how he tends to deal with life. He's very straight down the middle. Things are very simple to him. And sometimes that can backfire on him because life is complex.
I think that sums him up really well, and he doesn't kind of let the things that have happened to him control him, if that makes sense.
Yeah. He's a great one in the believer of we don't talk about our problems, we hold them in. But every once in a while he will let rip because he can only keep things so far. He tries to be fair and he just can't abide it when people do things that aren't fair and that aren't decent. But he seems to resonate with a lot of the readers, and they've come out with all sorts of images for him, from Stephen Graham to all sorts of characters really. Tom Hardy, I think one year somebody said, although I do think he's a little bit too young, he's definitely a rugged type of character. Not muscle bound because he knows his limitations, but he is quick to flare. And it's the rage that you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of. So I think there's a little bit of Kevin in many of us.
Do you have an image of him yourself? So, like people have suggested it, but do you have
no, when I think of him, because he's always kind of there in the background when I'm writing, he doesn't have a face. And yes, there's lots of suggestions over the years as to who could play him. I think Philip Glenister was another name that came forward, and I could kind of see that. But I prefer not to think of him as any of those characters. I think of his own character and his own personality really, rather than looks. And I've been careful not to describe him too much. I think part of the fun of being a reader is portraying your own image onto that person. So although we know that he's got short hair, I don't really say too much about the colour of it. I don't say too much about his features, more about the faces that he pulls than anything else, so that the reader can project their preference.
We've got some hellos from Leslie and Sam and Aggie, who is also telling me that I stole her question, which I think might be. I met Aggie in Wigan. She's very nice lady.
Oh, fab.
Nice to see you online as well. So Made to Be Broken's like it's quite far into the series, and it's got quite a lot of kind of complex threads running through it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the plot without giving too much away? Because I'm trying to frame my questions that I have without giving away spoilers.
Thank you so much for that, because I am very aware that it's a tricky thing to talk about. Yes, okay. Made to Be Broken is the 8th book in the series. It can be read as a standalone. I try to write all the books so that there's a complete plot that needs to be resolved. But obviously there's underlying personal issues that if you want to kind of fully immerse yourself in Coupland's world, then it's as well to read from the beginning. But they can all each be read in isolation. Made to Be Broken does cover or touch on the topic of gender-based violence and violence towards women. It was inspired from a report that I read a couple of years ago that was produced by the Centre for Women's Justice. And it was really about the disparity in the way that men and women are treated as a result of committing a violent crime. I hadn't really thought about it prior to that. But if you think about it, in many ways, women are weaker than men, whether we like it or not. We do not have the same weight. We do not have the same strength. We do not have the same necessarily drive to protect ourselves under certain situations. And therefore, it can be seen to be understandable if a woman uses a weapon, for example, to defend herself. But the immediate use of that weapon can create, it creates a very tricky situation in that the seriousness of that crime is immediately elevated. And the report sort of went on to reference two women who in 1990, Sarah Thornton and Kiranjit Alawalia, who were sentenced to life for defending themselves against very violent partners. Channel 4 did a documentary on them a year later. And I just thought it was fascinating and terrifying that when backed into a corner, women have very limited options. So I read that, digested it, did a little bit more research and thought, okay, this is, terrifying, really. How can I put this into or explore this further to put into a novel without making the novel about, this thing? I didn't want it to be just about that. So I decided to create a plot. So the book opens, the story opens to a crime scene where Coupland is called along to deal with what on the face of it could have been a road traffic accident, except we discover very quickly it isn't. And it's definitely a murder. Coupland gets involved in that investigation, heads it up, and his purpose at that point is to try and establish who could possibly have murdered Adam Sinclair, who is a reasonably successful banker in the sort of dealing with high net worth clients, who could possibly have wanted him dead. So Coupland is investigating and interviewing all his colleagues and people within his circle to try and get a better understanding of what might have happened. And I do throw in different things along the way There's a blast from the past that is mentioned in an earlier book, a character, but I do fully explain who they are. So again, you don't have to have read an earlier book to get an understanding of their backstory. And then it's while Coupland's just coming to the conclusion of this investigation that the real story begins. And I've written it this way because I wanted the reader to be shocked by what happens. I didn't want them to start reading it looking for it. I wanted them to think, okay, this is the plot, this is what's happening, oh my God. And that's kind of what I hope has happened. It was very difficult to write it that way, but it made sense to me. And the feedback I've had has been amazing. I've actually had professionals get in touch and say that they were quite shaken with the reality of how it was written, which is great for me to hear. But I did put extensive research into it, and I do have some really good advisors who were able to give me some of the practical advice. How I tend to like to write is not so much that everything is resolved in a picture book way. I kind of like the reality, which is, well, it's supposed to happen this way, but there's been cutbacks and we're not well resourced and somebody was off that day and these things don't happen. So I kind of like to write about the reality of what happens rather than the picture book. So it's brutal in its honesty. It's brutal in the fact that it's about violence against women and how the society's been conditioned in many ways to downplay it and to not really be shocked by it. And I think what's happened in the last couple of years in the news highlights that, because we've now got phrases like victim blaming, which I hadn't heard of a few years ago, where now we're understanding that it's wrong to say to somebody, well, you might have been to blame for the thing that happened to you because of what you were wearing or what you were saying or the fact that you put up with it. And it's about maybe making us re-educate ourselves or make us think about the ways that we deal with our reactions. I mean, we all flippantly use the phrase, oh, they're having a domestic, don't we? When we hear somebody, a couple having a row, for example. Well, maybe we shouldn't be so flippant about the use of those descriptions. Maybe we should think about, well, what does that really mean? Because if that was two strangers going at it in a certain way, then maybe it wouldn't be as acceptable. So that's kind of how the story is. So there's a lot going on, and the story kind of appears, the real story appears further into the plot. I hope that makes some sort of sense.
It really does. And as someone who's read it, it definitely has the effect that you were saying you were aiming for. It does kind of, bits of the plot do hit you and really hit you and leave you thinking about things after you're finished. We've got a question from David Monaghan Jones.
Okay.
He's an author and an ex-police officer.
Okay.
So he wants to know if you're a people watcher. Do you sit and take in who's in view and without them ever knowing it, incorporate their characteristics and traits?
Oh, great question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Even when I'm trying not to be. When Made to Be Broken was released on the 27th of May, I went on my first holiday for 2 years, thanks to the pandemic, the day after. So I had a week in Italy. And I still constantly watched and listened. And yes, I do. Mannerisms, I'm always picking up on mannerisms. And just the way that somebody will do something, whether it's a repetitive act or we've all got little tells. So I collect them and I'll make little notes about them, and they will manifest themselves. Sometimes to make a character stand out, you have to exaggerate and maybe give them 4 or 5 of these actions, where normally they'd be, sort of belonging to different people, but all the time all the time. That's the fun of it, really. Watching somebody and think, oh my goodness, that'll be great in a book.
You're saying you should have been a detective.
Goodness. Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate as well that I have a really good police source that helps me with the plots now and the procedures, because you want to keep up to date and you want to make them as real as possible. And sometimes you do have to, I do have it, like I'll have an idea, or I would like to do this thing, and I've got the pace book, you know, I mean, anybody who hasn't seen how thick it is, I mean, it's just, so, you know, that's what I read when I really want to knock myself out. And PACE is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. For anybody in this club that wouldn't possibly know that, I'm sure there's nobody. I'm sure everybody's fully aware of it. But sometimes you want, again, the practicality. How does that really work? You know, because that gives me the textbook version, but we all know that that's not really how life works. So yes, and so for that reason, I've been given some really funny anecdotes again about fellow officers and nicknames and various things, and so yeah, I use them in the book. I'm very grateful for them. I think, would I have loved to have been a detective? I think I probably would have been terrified, to be honest. I do quite envy, is it Peter Robinson that sometimes shows clips of when he's out with Brighton Police? I think I'd love to do. I'd like maybe a day out, a couple of days out. That'd be quite exciting, I think, and it would certainly keep me busy for a few weeks afterwards.
Mojo said that Pace was his Bible as a custody inspector.
Yes, goodness.
Aggie says, on the back of David's question, do any of the characters have your own traits and mannerisms?
Oh goodness, how much of this can I answer, honestly?
It's another good question, though.
It's great. I am a thinker and a worrier. I overthink everything, and I can suffer from a lot of anxiety, and you know, literally I will sit and ponder things. So I do find writing is a really great way of exploring what's going on. And so sometimes I will disguise things, or, you know, for example, Coupland, for example, he's got high blood pressure. I wonder where he's got that from. You know, he has to watch what he eats for cholesterol purposes. I wonder where he's got that from. I make several references in Made to Be Broken about I think when there are several references where people are getting into trouble or might get into trouble, and I make suggestions where somebody's having a colonoscopy. I think one of the sergeants says, the last time I did this for you, Coupland, I got a full colonoscopy. Well, I happened to have one last year. So I think these kind of things I do put into the book. It's possibly oversharing now, so I won't go say too much more, but I do put things in because it's in your mind. How, you know, what can I do with it? Oh, I know, I can kind of throw it in there. Nobody will ever know. And that's kind of how I work with it. So I've never been asked that question before, so that's a new answer.
Leslie wants to know if you're a full-time writer.
Yes, I am. For the last sort of 5 years, 6 years, I've been lucky enough to be able to write full time. And it was very difficult in the early days trying to fit it around a job. I kind of made the mistake when I first started writing of setting up my own business at the same time. So I then had two really busy occupations. The reason why I set the business up was because I thought, well, eventually I can employ people that will backfill my time so that I could write, and that's what I did for the middle years. So I was able to slowly reduce my days until I was in a position where I could actually write full time. And the appetite now is such that I'd have no option but to write full time, because as soon as the book's finished, get messages saying when's the next one out, and with a smiley face at the end of it, but fine well that there's an expectation, and I love doing it. I've got plenty more to write about, so yeah, we'll keep at it.
You don't realise what monsters you create, also. When you've written something that someone really likes, you create a monster in your fans. I've just been hassling an author I really like the book too. I'm like, I need to write the next one. I need the next one.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's really flattering to hear, and it is, you're very grateful for that, because at the beginning you're desperate to know whether anybody's going to like this character or these characters, and you don't really know that until you're maybe a book or two down the line. But yes, when you get your avid fans get in touch and say, well, by the end of the day, it's on its release day, I've read it, and you're like, that took me 6 months to write, but that's the nature of the beast. So you kind of just have to plod on as much as you can and try and get the typing speeds going.
So what have you got? So you're away on launch day, living the dream in Italy. What launch events and kind of things have you got planned? Have you got any kind of author talks?
I've got a couple of talks coming up, actually. Where I live in East Lothian, there's a festival called Fringe by the Sea. And so I'm actually going to be introducing and doing book reading at one of their events. And I'm also giving a talk on gender-based violence as well. Which will be quite interesting, because I don't normally talk about a particular theme, but I think it was just around the book that it made sense to do that. And my local library's got a Time for Crime festival, which they've asked me to come and speak at. But I am very happy to travel around again and speak at festivals. So if anybody, or at libraries, so if anybody would like me to get involved with their local library, then please feel free to get in touch. I feel now that restrictions are back to normal, it'll be great to face with people again.
You'd be willing to travel somewhere like Leeds or Manchester then if we put on an event?
Yeah, I would, because well, Manchester's a no-brainer, because obviously, you take the girl out of Manchester, but you can't take Manchester out of the girl, so that's a given. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to tie in where I've got an event. If I've got I don't know, a radio interview or a PR thing, then I would always try and contact the local libraries or whatever at the time and say, look, I'm going to be here. Is there anything that we can do? Because it makes sense if you're in an area to try and do as much as you can at the same time, which will be great fun.
There is a really good library event in Manchester, like a crime one.
Yes, I think I've actually seen that. I think I might have even clicked onto the links now.
Yeah, it happens monthly, I think. I don't know how long they're planning to run it for, but it seems hoping it'll carry on for a while. So I'd quite like to, I'm not aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that these events are happening again, because certainly before the pandemic, I used to love going out and meeting people, because then you're getting immediate feedback, and people can maybe ask. I mean, these events are great as well, because you can get asking questions, and I think anywhere where people can ask a question, where there's some interaction, is so much more fun, because they've got a chance to be heard or to make their comments as well. And I'm always keen to hear, because I want to know, well, what is it that makes readers interested in crime fiction, in the kind of fiction that I write? What kind of characters do you like? Who is it you like? It's always useful for me to know as well. And you get an opportunity to do that and meet the people that are reading your books.
So one of the other things that came up in Made to Be Broke, I'm trying to think about if I can. No, I might not ask you this question. It might give away a spoiler. This is the problem. Every question I've got, I'm like, I don't know if I can ask that. What are you working on now?
Okay, well, I do mention in Made to Be Broken, and this is a kind of a recurring theme. Earlier on in the series, in When Darkness Falls, Coupland comes across sort of a national, international villain by the name of the Dutchman, and he has sort of wreaked havoc um, on a variety of different cities in relation to, for example, the dark web and online abuse. And although the police have been able to catch localized criminals that have been involved in this network, Coupland wants to get this linchpin, the Dutchman, and he's never been in a position to do that. He's a detective sergeant in a murder squad in Salford precinct. He's not going to be in a position to do anything about it. And then suddenly things change. And obviously you'll find out more about that, those that haven't read Made to Be Broken, but he is given an opportunity to put himself forward, and that there's not really a great spoiler in that, because the readers are very clear that he really can't stand this sort of villain, for want of a better word. So book 9 is about him going into this environment and tackling him. So there's going to be a wider group. He's going to have to, buy himself a new suit and brush up his etiquette, because he's going to be dealing with higher ranking officers, and he's really going to have to mind his P's and Q's if he wants to stay on this team. So that'll be a challenge for him.
David is bidding for my job with the questions he's coming up. I'm going to be on here hosting soon, if you're coming on. He says, what's the most you've written and then decided to give up on it because it didn't quite flow or fit in with the storyline?
Oh, goodness.
He's really coming up with the good questions today.
It is, yeah. Okay. Prior to the Coupland series, I wrote a whole book which I thought had legs, and it didn't. It might have had, an ankle or a foot. It didn't have a whole leg. There was not enough to it, and it took a couple of painful years of touting that before I realised that. But once I'd made the decision to leave it, that was great. If David's meaning about the current series, when you've invested your time and your energy into creating something and you think there's no room for that, and research can make you do that, because you go off on a tangent and you learn this piece of information and it seems so exciting and great and relevant, and you want to put this information in the book, and then you lose sight of the fact, well, actually it's got no relevance at all. If it isn't moving the story forward, get rid of it. So I will happily remove it, but then I have a little store cupboard of kind of tools or stories or whatever you want to call them, plots or incidents, and I will keep them. In fairness, I very rarely go back to them, because you'd have to probably think of something around them to actually make some use of them. But yeah, you do have to kind of bite the bullet. And in terms of the most I've ever written, I probably spent 3 weeks working on a piece, produced, I don't know how many words it would be, but produced a piece of work and then thought, no, that's not going anywhere. So in terms of time, it was considerable.
Sam said it's interesting to see how different ranks interact and how the personalities reflect who they're speaking to. It adds such realism to characters. Is that easy to manage when writing?
Yeah. Is it? Yes, it is. I mean, what I do is I have got my police advisor, so I can ask him, and it's quite interesting actually, because there was a conversation thread on the site. Was it today about rank? About detectives versus uniformed officers, and it was very interesting because I know my source has been very clear about his feelings on that. And so to try and be as honest as possible, and also as concise as possible, because you're reducing in some cases, you know, whereas you might have 30 officers involved in something, you can only really reduce it down to maybe 5 or 6 to make the readers remember the names, and to make the conversation flow in a certain way. So you kind of have to, there has to be very clear that people do as they're told, that they have to do what they've been instructed to do. But there also has to be an opportunity for autonomy, for them to be able to go off and do what they do. So I hope that I kind of make it work. When Coupland's getting information that he doesn't like, he's getting it from the higher ups a lot of the time, and then he probably does push the way that he speaks back. But I've tried to make that as honest as possible with the rebukes he sometimes gets, and the warnings, and the referrals to complaints or whatever. I do kind of try and make that as realistic as possible. And I think in Made to Be Broken, there's now a bit of a truce between him and the Superintendent Curtis, which I think there's an understanding between them now, where there was a bigger division. That doesn't necessarily mean to say that Coupland's softened in any way, but I think he's learning to see a bigger picture, which will help him for the next investigation.
David's saying that uniform and CID apparently historically had a rift and problems, but not in modern policing.
Yeah.
So how do you deal? So Made to Be Broken, like we talked about, deals with some very thorny subjects that must really play on your emotions, because they play on the reader's emotions, reading them. How do you deal with writing something like that? Do you have to how do you park it and kind of move away from it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I am a geeky gardener. I mean, don't get me started. I could absolutely go, bore everyone to death with my gardening stories. And I think I developed that as a way of dealing with trying to introduce a bit of mindfulness, a bit of relaxation. It takes me away from everything. When I write really harrowing scenes, or when I write, it's more emotional than harrowing, I think. It can really affect me, because I kind of think, well, if I'm not moved by it, how will the reader not be? So I kind of really force myself to get in the moment, and then when I've completed that scene, I will go and maybe do some pruning or something. I will go in the garden and I will do something. I will spend an hour, and whatever the weather is like, and I will do something, and it just takes me completely away. My editor said when she read the first draft of Made to Be Broken that a certain part of it made her cry, and I thought, well, it's done its job then. But yeah, it can be exhausting. You have to take time out.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you have like a kind of a set amount of books you're going to write in the series? Do you have like a sort of an ending?
No, I haven't even thought of an ending, because at the moment there's a lot of things that I want him to do, and so I have got lots of thoughts of how he's going to do things. It might be that there are some changes along the way in how he does them, but I certainly enjoy writing. I have a great deal of fun with him as the central character. A couple of other characters have popped up in recent years that I'd quite like to explore as well, in a little as a little standalone maybe. So that might be something that if I get time, I'll have a go at.
So David says that he's going to let me ask a few questions now.
Thank you, David.
I have my job back, apparently. He's having to leave, but he's going to watch the rest later. He says you come across very well. He thinks your Manchester roots have served you well. All the best.
Oh, champion.
Yeah. So we talked about what you're writing now. One of the questions that Sam likes to ask a lot is, have you ever acted out a scene as you've written it?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. I mean, I sometimes do read things aloud. And I do sometimes, well, sometimes I kind of, I mean, I chunner away a lot when I'm working. You know, I'm often, you know, my other half will sometimes put his head in the door and say, "Have you got somebody in there? Are you talking to somebody on the phone?" Because he'll hear something. And yes, I will sometimes have a conversation, or I just want to try something for size, just want to see what something, whether it sounds clunky, because sometimes you've got an idea and you put it down on paper and you think, well, when you read that back, it's not going to work. So how can you get that point across in a way that it still has meaning? So kind of do play about with things. Yeah.
We've had every range of answers to this. Some people won't admit to it. There's an author called Mark Richards who legendarily has acted out a fight scene on Whitby Pier.
Oh, okay. No, nothing as dramatic.
That have held things to their throats.
No. Oh, no. I'm just trying to think. Sometimes if I'm trying to work out a scene. Oh goodness. Okay, right. In When Darkness Falls, is that right? In When Darkness Falls, there is a scene where, to escape from her captor, this girl's sort of in the bedroom, captor's in the lounge, and I'd sort of said that she's going to use a bottle to whack him over the head. And I said to my partner, how do you think that's going to go? And so we did, to be fair, we did try a couple of, well, what angle should the bottle be at? Because I didn't want the guy to be killed. I just wanted him to be stunned. I didn't want the bottle to break. So there was a bit of role play going on there. We had to drink the wine first to be able to use the empty bottle. And then we did do that. And I don't know if neighbours looked in that evening and came to different conclusions, but it certainly helped. So yes, I do recall that.
Excellent answer. Well, you get listed now in the list of people. Would you write sort of things other than the coupon series? You got any other kind of things in the work, like standalones or anything like that?
Well, I did. I've got a 2-book. Did you call 2 books a series? I've got 2 books that are set in Edinburgh that are based. They're the exact opposite of the Coupland series because they're from the criminal's point of view. A guy, David Johnson, comes out of prison and is immediately trying to get on with his life and start up a new life for himself, and a cop with a grudge basically frames him for murder, and so it's like a cat and mouse situation through the streets of Edinburgh, quite a high octane chase, where Davy realizes the only way he's going to clear his name is to get back in touch with all of his old underworld cronies, and they've got to help him. And there's a few comedians along the way, some really great characters that I loved writing about. And I would have loved to have done more about that, but the appetite for Coupland was such that I just focused after writing those 2 books, focused on Coupland. However, I really do like Alex Morton, who is a DI in the series now, and she's going places, and I would like to write something from her perspective. And I also like DS Ashcroft, who has been in since, goodness, I think he's been in since book 3. But I'd really like to write something from his perspective as well. So that really interests me. Whether or not I can do that and tie it back in, or they'd be pure standalones. I don't know, but that's something that is certainly, I've written it down on my pad anyway with a question mark, so we'll see where that goes.
Leslie says she likes the criminal point of view idea.
Yeah, well, it completely opens up, you know, possibilities. That was kind of what made me sort of think about it. I had a job working with ex-offenders for several years, and it did frustrate me to see that when somebody gets themselves in a really difficult situation, whether it's reputation-wise or situation-wise, it's really hard to get out of that. And sometimes the reputation will go before them, and that's a blight in itself. And I really wanted to try and highlight that. And so I did it in a way that it's as I say, quite high octane, because he's on the run in a pretty small city where everybody knows each other. It really is as simple as that. So he has to stay under the marker, and he has all these different contacts, and they're all, you know, they're all your sort of Scottish gangland hard men, but he's a good one at the end of the day, and that's one of the things that the readers fed back and said they hadn't realised, that this was a situation that existed where you could get decent criminals. We've all got flaws in us, you know, and that's one of the things I think that crime writers explore. You know, we live every day up with this scale balancing from left to right, from good to bad, and it may be that some of us do things on a certain extreme, but that doesn't change who we are, and we're still, you know, that's why mothers will still visit sons, or sisters will support brothers, because they're individuals in their own right, regardless of what other acts they may or may not be doing. And that's what makes it very tricky, and that's what makes it fascinating to write about. So yeah, I love looking at different challenging situations and thinking, well, what would happen if we did that, and what if she did that, and would we think of it differently because they did it and not him? You know, that is about perceptions as well, isn't it? So yeah.
So thinking about David's comment about your Manchester roots, there is a lot of really good crime fiction and crime fiction authors from and around Manchester. What do you think makes it like a city of such amazing authors, or that
Well,
produces such amazing authors?
I think, well, I'm biased, but I think Northerners have got a unique humour. I think Northerners have got quite a dark humour, and will kind of chuckle over things that maybe others don't get. And I think that's great for crime writing, because you can write about quite dark topics, but you don't want to write a misery. It's not a misery memoir you're writing. You're not writing something to depress someone. You want them to turn the page quickly, to be enthralled, to wonder what's happening. But it's a harrowing thing that you're writing about. But if you put in the northern humour, a bit of the sarcasm, maybe, the bluntness, the way I think Northerners have a quite a basic view of the world. It's not flowery, it's not literary, and I say that with no apology. It's belt and braces stuff, because that is life, and I think that's how people, the majority of people that don't come from privilege, will recognize and respond. And I think that's why it's so popular, because it's open and it's honest, and it can be brutal, but it can also be deeply moving and positive in a way that will resonate.
Good answer.
Thank you.
My other current favourite author chat question is, what have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
Okay, right. Well, I've become thoroughly addicted to The Secret Barrister. So nobody knows who that actually is. It's a working barrister who's written three factual books at the moment on the flaws of the criminal justice system. So for obvious reasons, I find that fascinating. I also have read books by undercover officers, a variety of different factual books again on criminology. So I do an awful lot of reading research. If I look at the books that I was reading on holiday, because I wanted to have a complete change, I'm a big fan of, I love Mark Billington's books. Mark Billingham's books. I love his books. Not read his latest, but I did read Rabbit Hole this year. And also John Harvey, big fan of his books. And I only realised just before I went away on holiday that there was a mini series that he'd written that I didn't know about. So such joy to find that there was about 3 or 4 books that I could download, which was fantastic. And it includes, I think, the last one he's ever written, because I think he drew the line after this particular book. So I'm really sort of into his. And I've also downloaded American Dirt, which I haven't started yet. So
I
yeah.
think there's no greater joy than finding out that like a book that you read and enjoyed is suddenly a series. I had this book that I loved when I was a kid, and when I was like an adult, I discovered that there wasn't a standalone book. I was
Brilliant.
convinced it was one book and there was a whole series of them, and I just then bought the whole series.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, this is the best discovery ever.
Absolutely. It's funny. It's a funny thing with a series, isn't it? Because I mean, I love reading all sorts of books, but there is a comfort in knowing that you kind of got to, you know this particular character, and you know them well enough to know that you're going to enjoy and have a good experience when you immerse yourself. And I think that's what I love when I do read a lot of serials.
Yeah, a good series is like a comfort read, isn't it? It's like you're going back to old friends.
Yeah, definitely.
Aggie wants to know in what crime subgenres you would classify your books, if in any.
Oh, that's always a tricky one. For some reason, I seem to be in hard boiled, and I would say I've looked at the others in that listing, and I would say, yeah, that's fair enough. It's certainly not cozy crime. Police procedural is the obvious one, and possibly some of the books. I can think of 2 of the books being better described under psychological. So Fragile Chord, for instance, because that's more of a why done it than a who done it, really. That would probably be better in psychological. But on the main, I suppose hard boiled, because it's kind of I think that to me means quite maybe hard stories, not necessarily graphic, but hard sort of stories, tough stories, stories maybe that are in the news, and certainly all police procedural.
Aggie often does also ask about books being translated. Are any of your books translated into other languages?
No, they're not. I would love that. I don't know where I would love that to start, but I think that would be amazing. I don't know what other cultures would make of Kevin Coupland, but I'm sure he would work in some settings.
Are they on audiobook?
Yes, in fact, that reminds me, breaking news, because I haven't announced this yet. My first 6 books are all on audiobook. And I've just signed a new contract with my audio publisher to release When Darkness Falls and Made to Be Broken as audiobooks. So they'll be coming out in the autumn. So I'm really delighted about that.
Brilliant. Do you get to choose the actor for it? But she obviously wants someone who's going to get the accent right. I feel like Coupland's got a proper Manchester accent.
He has, yeah. You have a limited say, to be honest. I mean, they do say you get some say, but you can kind of describe who you like and what you kind of want them to say, and then you get audition tapes and you can listen to those. So the actor that plays Coupland or reads the books, Alistair Austin, I think is very good. He's got quite a strong voice, and I think he gets the sort of gravelly Mancunian accent reasonably well. He seems to get that tone, because I think it needs to be quite a deep voice really to get kind of Coupland's character out in the voice. But yeah, so I'm really thrilled that is continuing.
Aggie's also said that she thinks that your book should be translated into Polish.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be great. Is Polish for a particular reason?
I think it's her native language. Not so many English writers translate to Polish, as it's a hard language. I always say it's possible. Lots of my friends read crime, although the majority is American writers.
Oh, that is very interesting. Thank you.
There you go. It's an untapped market.
Absolutely, yes.
English crime fiction. We need to be telling people.
Yeah.
Has there ever been any TV interest in the Coupland series?
Not yet. I am inundated with emails and messages from readers that say they would love to see him on TV. So last year I decided to put myself through a script writing course, a part-time script writing course, to see how difficult it could be to produce a script. What I learned from that was, in my view, it's very difficult. It's the opposite of novel writing, whereas when you're writing a novel, you have to convey the scene, the sense of place, what people are feeling, the dialogue and everything else. The script writing is the opposite of that. And I think for me to switch, I think from what I understand, it's easier to go from script writing to writing a novel than from writing a novel to script writing. So what I learned from that exercise is I need to collaborate with somebody to produce a script to be able to start to go round and speak to commissioning editors, because I feel that there's enough in the series now to make that a credible proposition. In the early days, when you've only got one or two books, there's a limit to where that could go.
I've been wondering for the last few days that to what extent, like, fans of a book can help with that. You know, is there an impact that fans of a book can have? Can they go to a publisher or a TV show and be like, I want this, you know, I need to see this?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, what influences them? Yeah. I mean, obviously, the popularity of a series must interest them, but I don't think it's just that, because you do hear quite obscure series get commissioned that people have never heard of till they're on the screen, and then they buy the books afterwards. So yeah, I mean, I would love that. I think it would be great, because I'd be rousing all the readers to say, well, come on guys, this is up to you now to try and make that happen. But I'm sure every other author would as well. So
yeah, I think I've read a book that's like recently that is looking for a publisher and it needs to be published. It's brilliant. Like, it's really, it's the best thing I've read this year. And I've read some really good books, yours included. And I'm like, there must be some power. We must have some power as fans to be able to go to people and say, we want this, you know, there is an audience for this.
I think you're absolutely right. That was one of the reasons why I went into self-publishing when I wrote Fragile Chord, because having secured an agent, and I was with the agent for 4 years, but every publishing house we went to, this was with a book prior to Fragile Chord, and they would be saying things like, we love this, but can you change the protagonist? Or we love this, but can you change the location? Can we change it? And at first I acquiesced and did all those things. and it was exhausting. And in the end, I said, I think I need to go my own way. And a friend told me about Amazon and how you could publish through Amazon, because I always believed that the reader would dictate. And it was the best thing I ever did. And it was absolutely true, because after 18 months of nothing, because nobody's even found it. So there is that you've got to kind of contend with. But then it picked up, and it picked up, and it was just amazing. I couldn't have predicted it. And fast forward sort of 3 or 4 years later, when I was offered a publishing deal, and I turned it down because I had autonomy at that point. But I always said that it should be the readers, not the gatekeepers, that determine who gets it through. So yeah, but there are options these days for writers. So I would say don't necessarily look at the traditional route. It's not always the best route.
No, you're right. Sam wants to know if you would want the script of the Coupland series to be true to your version.
Oh goodness, that's
One of these authors that's like, just give me the money and I'm going to run. Do what you
yeah.
want.
Look, on the one hand, you think, oh my goodness, yeah, what you've just said. But then when you listen, I mean, Ian Rankin came out, was it last year, and said that he maybe regretted the way that the scripts had been produced. And I've heard that other writers have been frustrated how long it's taken them to get to the screen when they've signed the dotted line. So I don't know. I mean, you know, let's be realistic here. If there was a significant number of zeros on it, would somebody care? I don't know. But I think there are questions to be asked, and not be bowled over. The problem with the industry is you're often so grateful when an offer comes along, and you're flattered as well. But the reality is you need to ask sensible questions.
I think you've given people some really good advice there. Thank you for that. We've got a few minutes left. Show us off book covers, because you probably persuaded everyone listening to go and at least try one book. Show us off some book covers. Tell us where they need to start in the series.
Okay, right, I will do. I will just have to go here and bring these over, because I hadn't thought about that bit. Good job I didn't have my pajama bottoms on. Okay, so it all starts with Fragile Chord. That's the very first book in the series, and that's where you get to know Coupland and his kind of sidekick at the time, and various other members of the team, and you get to know about his personal life and the things that motivate him. So the latest book, just looking at the time there, Made to be Broken. As I say, I love this cover. I've got a new cover designer, and I absolutely love this cover, and she's going to be doing all the covers for me again. But this can be read as a standalone because of the subject matter. It's a story in its own right. But Cooper's backstory and his personal life has progressed through the series, and so those that have followed the series have been quite happy with a lot of the things that are revealed in this book, and obviously slightly shocked at some of the other things as well. So yeah, so that's the very latest book, and very, very briefly, we've got a serial killer let loose in One Bad Turn, which is book 3 in the series. And there's Gangland and an arsonist in Flesh and Blood. So I think I've not mentioned Absent, which covers it's a child abuse story that really introduces us to the Dutchman for the very first time. So there's a lot going on there. If you're interested in looking at discovering your next new detective series, then the books are available on Amazon as paperback, ebook, and audiobook.
And can people buy signed copies from you?
They can indeed. At the moment, that would just have to be through the website or through my author page.
Fair enough. And then all that's left to say is thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolutely fascinating hour.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for the great questions. I mean, they were absolutely fabulous. Wasn't expecting some of them. David, there was a couple of blinders there. Loved it. So yeah, thanks. And thank you, Caroline, for having me. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.